Test one, test two, test three. Your
Okay.
turn.
Testing, testing. Can you hear? Test, test. Couple
Perfect.
more
All
tests.
right.
Okay. Alrighty. So, this is the Anime Podcast Week 11. 2021 Spring Gauntlet is coming close to the end. We have a couple of pretty solid shows, and at least from my end, the scores of the remaining shows definitely kind of reflects that we've gotten some of the better titles remaining. I might say overall. Yeah. Just as a reminder, this is the second to last episode of this season. So the last the last episode, which will be next week, will have a big bunch of awards and all that type of stuff. So make sure you tune in next week as well. Alrighty.
Yeah. So we only have 10 shows. So
Mm-hmm.
because of the way we set this up, the top we have to be in the top half to
Yeah.
advance to the next round, and bottom five are in contention to being dropped. Fun fact as well, of all 10 shows, there are only two shows where the running average went down. And funny
Okay.
enough, it is actually the number one show and the number 10 show that went
Okay.
down.
Okay.
So yeah.
Alrighty. Let's dive into it. So, Vivi Floret's Eyes song. It was at number one. Manatsu gave it a score of 6.5. I gave it a score of 8. The rolling average went down by 0.05 to get a 7.78. Is this the lowest score you've given the show?
Ooh, let me see, actually. No, no, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
This is tied for second lowest, technically.
Okay. Alrighty. So, anyways, hit me up with your thoughts. What did you like
Yeah,
about this? What
so
you didn't like?
so I thought overall, I mean, solid episode.
Okay.
6.5 is pretty high in retrospect, but I think the reason why it didn't score so high for me is because not really much happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Vivi always excites with action. There was not that much action.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's more informational.
Yeah.
Like we were trying to kind of figure
Expository.
out,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
why it didn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why the project failed and what they have to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the big reveal at the end, where the archive
Yeah.
was like the big baddie, wasn't as interesting to me.
Okay.
Maybe next week
That's
they'll
fair.
explain why that's
Yeah.
the case.
Mm-hmm.
But for this week,
I,
just knowing it's the archive, it's like,
okay. I have a theory which actually makes me really like the. Okay, I will say overall, I think this was one of those episodes where I acknowledge that like there's a decent amount of expository stuff. I do think most of the things kind of were like almost necessary. Like it's like they had to address at some point. It would have. I don't even know if it would have been possible for them to like kind of spread it out a little bit more through a couple episodes, so we don't have one just heavy expository episode. I will acknowledge that. I have a
Mhm.
theory, which I actually think there's a pretty cool beauty to it that the AIs actually only end up happening specifically because Vivi trailblazes her path, and it's this
Yeah, that.
idea. Oh, okay, yeah,
Mhm.
like, and so it's this idea that like, oh, like because she was in the arc, is it called the Archon or something like that? The
Archive.
the archive, yeah, the archive. And when she was doing all that stuff, the archive picked up on it, and I think there was like this idea where okay, now AIs for the first time have crossed the threshold of essentially seeking their own purpose, and this is why we're in the situation that we're at, which would actually be quite interesting because I think like it's okay. I think as a viewer, just because of the quality of the show, you've grown to really like Diva slash Vivi, and it's
Mhm.
very you're at least for me personally, I was very excited for her identities when they essentially did that process of writing her own song, right, and like kind of finding her own meaning. But I do think that it's like it's very good writing and definitely gets the brain juices flowing when something that we would consider as a human, right, to be like, oh my, it's so beautiful, its purpose ends up kind of being like the fall of AI and humanity's coexistence, right? And like
Mhm.
seeing how she'll potentially have to navigate that. I'm really hoping that they kind of explored that, and that's kind of like the ending. We'll see. But I think I personally thought it wasn't. I actually thought it was like decently enough. There's enough content in there for me to be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, because I do think that they are kind of tying like a couple of loose ends. Like, for example, like, the. I mean, it is kind of nice to like see that little boy
Beth.
that visited her, and
Oh, little
the
boy.
little boy
Yeah, yeah.
that initially visited her end up being, the professor, right? Beth, and that whole, I guess it's not that big, but like, like her trying to navigate essentially like, oh, like, you know, seeing her sister again and all that type of stuff. I do think that like it's I thought it was like, I thought it was nice. I think the reason I also ended up giving a decent rating just because visually it's still just such a stunning, like such a well done show. Like I think like it's just, I don't know.
I
I
think in
still thought it's pretty
general,
solid.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought this
Mm-hmm.
this episode was weak in the art department. I think there were
Interesting.
certain
Okay.
scenes that looked solid, but I think I started to see some degrading of well, I mean, a lot of it because it's still shots, not much action, so like, they
Okay.
couldn't really flaunt, the
Yeah.
amazing action moments that they used to have.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, yeah. So this is being only the one of two shows that end up having a slight, or I don't even know if the 10th one had a huge drop, but had a drop in average score. That being said, it still retains the number one spot. And yeah, I still think that this show very deservedly holds a number one spot, and I just can't wait to see the next episode.
Yeah, and so
Does this show
we'll
have two episodes remaining or one?
yeah, so for since last week, next week is gonna be week 12.
Yeah.
All the shows that'll be week 12 and 13 we'll be watching together.
Yes.
This show has two more episodes, 13
Okay. Two.
episodes.
Okay.
So we have two more
Alrighty.
episodes to cover.
Alrighty.
All right. At number 2, it is still
Yeah.
those Snow White Notes. It has both our highest scores for this week. So I gave
Yep.
it a 7.8. You gave it a score of 9 for a rolling average of 6.99. It's almost close to being the second show to break 7.
Yeah.
So it went up by 0.14. Why did you give it your high score this week?
I was about to not give it that high of a score. Okay, so let me put it like this. Actually, that's a lie. I thought that the episode was already pretty good. I think that I was a little bit afraid that the first guy with his string snap was gonna end up getting a
Yeah.
good score, and then when they essentially told like, oh, this is what actually happened, I was like, oh no, that's exactly what happened. Like I think like me and my little brother both like competed a lot in like music competitions when we were young. I'm like, yeah, you would get a shitty score for something like that happening, like no matter how rousing it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that's so first of all, I did kind of, I liked that they pulled me back, at least like pulled in some realism, I think, into the into the into the show. I was afraid my immersion would kind of get like a little bit broken with that, but I'm glad it didn't happen. Besides that though, I do think that what ended up giving me like a really solid impression of the episode was specifically how like, and I can't even say it's not cheesy, but like he started off emulating his father's, like his grandfather's like really old and
Yeah.
like, shall I say, like like frozen sound, or not frozen but like cold, like very refined yet refined sound, right? And like how he literally has like a musical journey that I thought was executed as well as a slice of life. Again, not as well as, but like a pretty well for a slice of life. I think they executed like the whole, like he originally tries to emulate his grandpa's style, or at least what he thought was his grandpa's style, right? And like that whole scene of his mother really pressuring him to him, but then while he was playing, right, he gets like the show does nice callbacks to essentially all these character development moments, and he ends up playing his mercury, as his brother described it, right? His mercurial sound finally comes out, and like I thought it was just like, I this one almost struck like a tiny bit, a tiny bit of a personal note, just like because I think I've shared this before, where like I think my one of the biggest things about my musical quote unquote career was that I was never really able to harness my emotions like super well into my playing, and like seeing like that happen, and I thought that it was like pretty good. Like I don't know, it definitely, I'll admit that this one kind of like brought a tear at the end, where I was like, oh man, like it doesn't even matter if like he's gonna win or not, like he's finally discovering his own sound, right? Because at the beginning when he's playing his grandpa's sound, the judges are like, holy shit, is this like even like a like a young 16-year-old or whatever, like this is crazy. And then I like, okay, I can't say for sure, but like it sounded like the judges were like, what the heck just happened, because he like started playing his own style. But like I don't know, I thought it was kind of like some beauty to it, where it is very consistent with him at the end of the day. Like he doesn't give that much of a shit about the competition or like winning, right? It's more about discovering his own sound, and more importantly, and I think like most importantly, he's kind of like fulfilling the grandpa's request to him, right? He's like, oh, you cannot pick this up until you figured out your own sound, and to him, that's the most important thing, right? And so like I don't know, I
Yeah.
just thought it was executed pretty well. Do you have any extra things to add onto it?
Yeah, I think so I think the music was well done for this one.
Yeah. Hmm.
I still think the show has a problem with animations.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it feels like they were rushed and there are a lot still of still shots here and there.
Okay.
That I think is problematic with a lot of shows this
Yeah.
season.
Hmm.
But I did like the moment that he kind of it is a journey, right?
Yeah.
That this whole journey about him trying to find his grandfather's sound and then
Yeah.
trying to find his sound.
Hmm.
And I think the fact that the stress that because he was gonna play his own sound, I think for the most part
Yes,
until
and
his
then
mom
until his mom came.
interjected.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, which I think
Yeah.
is no. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I was like, oh, it's hard for me to believe, but no, I give it a benefit of a doubt. Like someone who is under pressure like that would like if
Yeah.
pressured like that,
Yeah.
he would
I mean,
resort to that.
and
So
his
I think that's fine.
yeah, yeah. I like think I gave it the benefit of the doubt because his mom also kind of pulls like an incredibly well
Yeah.
manipulated thing where he's like, oh, this is called the Matsuguro Cup. Like, how can you just let your
Hmm.
grandpa's like sound disappear and shit like that? Like, it's
Yeah,
an
he was really
emotional.
she was
like,
really
yeah,
just guilting
yeah,
him.
hmm,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I like it.
I think the reason why I didn't give it such a high score is because
Okay.
you're right. It is a bit of a slice of life
Yeah.
cliche.
Yeah.
This kind of journey.
Yeah.
Always the first big performance. That person, their main character, doesn't do well in the first half, and then towards the second half of his
Yeah.
or her performance, plays well. It's
Yeah.
just a trope. So I think
Yeah.
for what it is, it did
Yeah.
well, and so I gave it the high score for me this week.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I will. Like, we definitely have to acknowledge that this is like very, very tropey writing. It's like it is still very slice of life. Like, but yeah, I mean, this is really, I don't know. I shed a little bit of a tear towards the end. Does this one have 13 episodes or 12 episodes?
This I believe will have 12, so just one more episode.
Okay, so
week.
one more episode. Alrighty, yeah, and I think like, I would imagine kind of like the climax more or less. Technically, the first half of the climax happens at the end of the episode, right, where he finally plays the Mercurial sound, and then they find out what ends up happening. But I mean, I do think that like, it'll be and I think we can save this a little bit more for after next week. But this will end up being a show where like, I think it's number 2 for a good reason. I think that it's solid. Like I would recommend it. It's not like necessarily like I definitely think there's a pretty big gap between this show and Vivi as of right now. But like it will be one of those shows where like despite for the most part dwelling well within the parameters of slice of life tropes, like still did pretty well like within the medium. I would say like just kind of like, or within the trope boundaries. Okay. And at number 3, 86. Stayed at number 3. Minasu gave it a score of 6.8. I gave it a score of 7. And the rolling average bumped up by 0.01 for a rolling average of 6.84. What did you think about this episode?
Yeah, this episode was really interesting. This is the final episode of this show. Oh yeah, that's a good segue to maybe a little bit of format. Even though the show is over, it still has to go through the gauntlet again this week, just this week. But because it's top 5, it is safe. So it is considered a gauntlet survivor for the purposes of the gauntlet. But for this week's episode, I still think some of the animation is a bit off. It wasn't perfectly clear. There was a lot of big moments here. So the first one is, from what I presume, is him leaving. So know how the robot died at the beginning, transitioning from the end of last week's episode. He left the box of tags with all the names with that robot. Which for me signals, well, that happened at the beginning of the episode, so that kind of raises a red flag, like, why is he giving away the tags? And then we see him climbing up the cliff, making sure that his friends don't die, so he will fight themselves. I thought the animation for the fight, even though it's a small fight, was really well done. I love the sounds. I think the audio was great for this episode. But ultimately, the two big things for me to take away was one, there was a small flashback, maybe flashback or flash forward. I'm not really sure if you caught it. but there was some sort of princess.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that that princess will be a big factor for the next season
Yeah,
of
the
the
next
show,
season.
which will be premiering in the fall.
Okay.
And then the second one is the big thing is I think all 4/5 members that are remaining 5 are dead.
Yeah.
Um,
It's um okay. Let me put it like this. I gave it a pretty good score because I think that okay, I was really worried that the show like kind of didn't have the guts to follow through and kind of like the dark theme,
yeah.
and I think that it
Hmm.
did. So I was like pretty satisfied
Yes.
with that. I let me. I'm trying to think of how to describe this. It's I think um everything kind of points up towards setting up a second season is kind of like the best way I'll put it.
Yeah.
I think that I won't I didn't end up faulting it for it just because I knew there was going to be a second season. I would have there was a tiny part of me that wanted for Undertaker to actually be able to take himself out, but this makes for a much more interesting second season because undoubtedly he will now be the enemy that you know the
Do we know if he's been taken or
so
not?
there's a thing at the end where you see him
His head
and
is
like
cut
his
off, right?
brother. Yes, his head is cut off, and that's kind of like the
Oh, his
process. Yeah,
brother. You're
yeah, yeah.
right. You're
His
right.
his
Okay.
the
Yep.
process.
Okay.
Yeah, of like where they take the head, they insert the brain into these vehicles, and so we
Hmm.
essentially like he had a thing where he's like, oh, they're trying to go for my head. He takes the pistol, and then like something happens, and like essentially it falls down. He can't reach the pistol, and then we know that he's dead. Okay, number one, we
Yeah.
know that he's dead because he meets his brother in the afterlife, and then number two, there's a
Yeah.
shot of his body without his head, and so it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
he's gonna be somebody they fight the next season. And like I said, I don't really
One of
fault them
these.
for
Yep.
that because like it'll definitely it's like why not have why not have a plot point that has a lot more character development like already kind of like put into it.
Hmm.
I get it, I get it.
Yeah.
I think that the it was it was in my opinion like a little bit cheesy. I think for specifically the commander that's on like house arrest, I think like her whole sequence seemed like a little bit like a little bit cheesy, but once again, like I didn't end up dinging it too much in my mind just because like this is a pretty decent setup for our next season, right? You
Yeah.
have somebody who's breaking away from the ranks, just like the what was it, Lieutenant Colonel that like ends up revealing to her that he's actually a whitey, right? Is that what they're
Yeah.
called? Yeah, like a whitey, and
Not that
then
mighty.
okay,
Was it Alba? Alba.
Alba, okay, yeah, Alba, which is but yeah,
Yeah.
like but Alba, yeah, so like reveals that he's at Alba, and then like essentially yeah, I mean, I do think that this show will have a pretty interesting second season. I think if I were to kind of this being the only show that we can actually talk about like in its entirety, since this is the only
Yeah.
one I think that's been completed all the way, is that I think that this season ended up being pretty good, and I think that it kept the number. It ended up number 3, right, and it bounced between number 2 and 3 for like a pretty good reason. I think that like sure like there were some elements of it, I think especially the storytelling where it's kind of like leaves a little bit left to be desired, but I think the slack of the story gets heavily overcompensated by the soundtracks, the audio visual stuff, and I think like overall like it's just a very enjoyable thing to watch. And I think that now that I'm thinking about it, the only other shows that I can think of which kind of deals with like a dystopic future that I think had this solid of a first season, probably like Attack on Titan is only one of my book that like actually had like that strong, I think, of a first season. So I mean, this is a pretty good start. I don't know how many seasons is gonna be for this, dude. Is there actually info on this? On like how many seasons
Yeah.
they're planning to do?
No, but there is. They've already announced the second season,
Yeah,
so
so
we
so
know
there's
that there
gonna
will be
be
a second
so
season.
like at least we know there's gonna be a second season. I don't know how many seasons there's gonna be, but it definitely started off on a pretty strong note. And yeah, I mean this is a show that I would end up recommending to people who want to like find an anime to watch. Right? I think that it's yeah, I think that the report card for this definitely in my book it's a pretty solid show.
I think my biggest gripe about this
Yeah.
show is uh the last is it 3 or 4 like ish episodes
Yeah.
were just so slow.
Yeah.
I think
It's
they really tried their best to stretch it.
yeah.
Because of the climax of him killing his brother
happened
was like
in
episode
8.
7,
Wait, is it 7 or
8.
8? Yeah, 7 or 8. I think it might have
Uh,
been end of 7 actually. Maybe end of 7 or like
oh
actually
no. Yeah, I'm not. I can't figure it out. But yeah, and so other than that, it's just been a slow
yeah,
like,
a
oh,
very
they're
yeah.
escaping again, they're escaping again. So it's like,
Yeah.
I think they tried to stretch it out,
Mm.
because they I guess it's a natural stopping point for
Yeah.
the story, which
Mm.
leads me to believe that the second half of the story will be more jam packed.
Yeah.
Just because like, oh, it's just slow for now. So
Yeah.
uh, that's my biggest gripe, at least towards
Yeah.
the end of this show.
I definitely think that this show could have. I mean, I understand that there's kind of like a schedule, and you probably have studio pressures and broadcasting pressures, like to be like, oh, stick to try to at least stick to like the third, anywhere between the 10 to 13 episode, right? Like that type of a
Yeah,
length, so that
that's
you can have
the
like that's the thing,
natural
right? And
length.
yeah, the natural length. And so, had this show been like, I definitely think this show could have been executed in 9 episodes. Um, like yeah, like it could have been executed in 9 episodes, but I
Hmm.
kind of get it, and I do think that I am tiny bit, I am a little bit more willing to give it a pass now that I mean, essentially, since this is going to have like a recurring, or rather like a following season, like
Hmm.
dragging out seems a little bit less egregious than if it was just a standalone series, right? If it's a standalone series,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
come on, just end it, just call it good. But yeah, I do think that from I think at the end of the day, the visuals, the audio visuals end up being kind of like the super. I think like the strongest point of this show. But I think the storytelling is solid enough to the point where I think it doesn't detract a crap ton, at least for the most part. I mean, towards the last couple episodes, you do
Hmm.
kind of get a little bit, but like for the most part, I think the storytelling is solid enough to the point where it doesn't detract a lot from your enjoyment of like I said, like it being an animation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Alrighty.
All right. Number 4 is going to be, once again, Odd Taxi. I gave it a score of 6. You give a score of 8 for a rolling average of 6.70. So it went up by 0.03. Uh, for this week's episode, so there's actually a big difference between you and my
Yeah.
score, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I guess I didn't give it too much high of a score because not again this one not much. Okay, there is a lot that happened, but at the same
Yes.
time not a lot that has happened, which is very typical, I feel like, for this show.
Okay.
um uh I enjoy the in-depth look of Nikaido, which I think is the name of the
The Black
star for,
Cat.
what's
Wait,
the
Mystery Kiss.
Mr. Kiss, yeah.
Yeah.
Which was great because I think
Yeah.
we got to see, because she had a relationship with the horse person and kind of came out of nowhere. So it's great to see how that
Mm-hmm.
formed. So I
Yeah.
like that. Biggest mystery still for me is who Otakawa has, because clearly it's not the student
Yeah.
anymore.
So
We assumed it was the
yeah, we
student
assumed it was
this
a
entire
student,
time.
and when he goes, "Oh, I know it's not you now," it's because he just has a very good face for memory, and he like knows that like that wasn't the
Yeah,
girl that was in the back seat, all that type of stuff.
yeah,
And obviously, he's not privy to behind the scenes, like try the mystery swap stuff. Um,
yeah.
I
So yeah, we still
yeah.
don't know who the kidnapped person
Yeah,
is.
we don't know who the
Kidnapped
kidnapped
person.
person is, right? It's there's I think that what you call it, this ends up being, I thought the treatment of the donkey. Okay, I thought it was a donkey. I'm not 100% sure if it's actually a donkey versus a horse,
Oh,
but like the
yeah.
donkey character. Anyways, the donkey comedian guy. I thought that the way they handled his story almost kind of like through other characters, right? So with him being like kind of like his very interesting attitude in life essentially end up being like an attraction point between him and the star of Mystery Kiss,
Yeah.
right? Like that, and them forming their relationship, and then you getting to see how even despite that he still decides to cut ties with his other comedian partner, right? And that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was just really really good character development. I will say that like I do think that most of the episode ended up being, shall we say, kind of like, oh, here's what happens that leaded up to it. I personally didn't mind it because I thought that like it was kind of like, there is one aspect. Okay, I will say the most enjoyable aspect of the show is still by far, I think, the dialogue and the characters. But
Yes.
as a second point, like kind of the mystery, right? And I do think that there was a decent amount of advancement on that front, and so I felt like I was pretty
Mm-hmm.
entertained throughout the whole thing. Uh, but yeah, is this show? How many episodes does this show have?
So it's 13. So two
Okay.
more episodes we'll be watching this coming week, which I
Okay.
think is great
Yeah.
because I think that of all the shows, this one excites me the most about
Yeah.
how they're going to wrap everything
Yeah.
up. Because it
Yeah.
can go so many directions.
Yeah. Exactly right. So yeah. I mean, we'll definitely talk a little bit more about this next episode, our next episode of our podcast, because we'll be wrapping it up then. But yeah, I mean, I have a very strong feeling that this will end up also being quite a gem from this season. And yeah, I definitely would recommend people to watch this in the future. All right. The last contender at number 5 is Koikumo. You gave it a score of 6.5. I gave it a score of 7. The rolling average is 6.02 and went up by 0.07. And yeah, this one ends up being the last of the top 5. I thought that this episode was, once again, I'll admit that there wasn't anything that was particularly standoutish about the episode. But I do think that, once again, like, per the strengths of this show, like, it does within the slice of life romance genre, right? It doesn't do anything that really, like, pops out. I'm like, oh, holy crap! I'm gonna call it at this moment. I thought this moment was like super incredibly well done. Like, I like think that the only like quote unquote superstar moment I've seen in this entire show up to this point was, in my opinion, how it's like, boss man and his coworker. I thought that,
Coworker.
I
Yeah,
thought
I
that I
agree.
thought that relationship was pretty well done, and that was arguably my quote unquote like, oh shit, like, like a shining gem moment. But outside of that moment, once again, this show, like, there just wasn't too much of that. But I will say that, like, I think that the dive into how she's trying to figure out her life, and then kind of foiling that with, essentially, there's a clash of, boss man and his dad, that family dynamic, and seeing kind of like how it is, like, like, just it's almost like such a huge stark reminder to be like, these people are just in different stages of life, which is, like,
Yeah.
I thought it's nice to highlight it. I think that towards the end, obviously kind of cheesy, but hey, I mean, like, it's to be expected within a romance slice of life. I think that, once again, like, I think that the voice acting in this show is particularly well done. I think that,
It's very crisp.
yeah, they're very crisp. I think that the colors, I won't say all the animations all the way, but I will say that, like, the colors and the vibe still give it enough of, like, a very, it's like, if it's like aesthetically pleasant to watch as like a mood set, like mood set wise, like, it's decent. Yeah. Anything?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree. I think
Yeah.
this week I give it one of the highest scores I have this
Okay.
week. I think like number 4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah, because this week's episode was good because we saw the main character Rio opening up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, actually, because actually for the most of the episode, most of the season, we've seen him really just exuding this personality. Like, oh, I'm an
Yeah.
adult.
Yes.
I want to shower you with love.
Yeah.
But now he's finally coming to terms with, like, oh, I actually like this person a lot,
Yeah.
and we have this stark age
Yeah.
differences, age difference. So how are you gonna deal with that? And so I
Yeah.
like the fact that he's exploring like these feelings. She
Yeah.
is too, but I think we've seen her explore her feelings
Yeah.
like this
Oh yeah, a
entire
lot more.
season.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're right. I think I like the fact that the dad was in the mix and
Yeah.
having to kind of, oh, there's some consequences to dating someone who's much younger than you. So
Yeah.
this show only has one episode left, so it's gonna be.
Okay.
Wait, actually, let me double check that. But I believe it only has one episode left, so it's gonna be coming to a close. Yep.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if there's gonna be another season or if there's even more content for this anime, because it looks like the manga is indeed finished.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, with 57 chapters. So there's still more content.
Okay.
So in terms of wrapping things up, because there's more content to be made, that means that I don't think we're gonna have a final resolution. I think it would be great if they started dating,
Yeah.
and then the second season can be them,
Yeah.
figuring things
Doing
stuff
dating.
out,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of conflicts that's about to
Yeah.
happen with that premise. But knowing anime, I don't think that's gonna happen. But
Yeah,
I can only
it would.
wish.
Yeah, it would be a nice treat if they ended up having, shall I say, the gonads to pull that off and just like
Yeah.
make like that much content, do like a relationship exploration. I
Mhm.
will say that in general, I Okay, part of this is genuinely personal taste, but I do also think, like, objectively speaking, a lot of East Asian shows, right? Like when it's on the topic of romance, it definitely stands out when essentially a show has the cojones to be like, oh, we're gonna spend this much of the show's runtime actually exploring a relationship dynamic as opposed to just like the pursuing phase, right? And so, like, to be
Yeah.
fair to the show, like this, it would be quite within the, shall we say, within the medium's par for it to just to continue kind of like this chasing journey. But once again, would be incredibly nice. I think that if they actually spent that much of the season kind of doing a little bit more of the exploration of that, right? And I think that it's in my honest opinion, there's not in my personal opinion, sorry, in my personal opinion, there's not enough you know shows that kind of focus on, shall we say, like this the second stage, right, of love. And I think that it would be, I think that with this show's skill and kind of like just handling dialogue and all that type of stuff, I really want to see what these people can do with essentially a focus on the relationship. I have pretty decent expectations for that, so that's what I would also hope. But one episode
Yeah.
left. I guess we'll see.
All right.
Alrighty.
So that ends the contenders.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are now moving on to the drop list. And we will begin with the creme of the crap, which is number
Gee.
6,
Yeah.
To Your Eternity.
Wow.
I gave it a score of 7.4. You gave it a score of 7 for a rolling average of 5.91. So it went up by 0.13. What do you think of this week's episode, considering that this is probably one of the higher scores in
Yes,
the
this is actually the
part of
higher.
the drop list?
Yes. Not only is it the highest scores in the drop list, I actually think this one has, just if you were to talk this week alone, I think it's top 3 this week.
Yes,
is it top
it's
3 or
no,
is it
no,
top
no.
4?
It is technically tied for
Okay.
fourth
Okay, technically
for
top for
for
fourth.
your
Okay.
score, and then
Okay.
for my score, it is second.
Okay, it's second. Yeah. Okay, so there you go. Like so like it ended up getting some pretty good. It's pretty good ratings. I think that this was um will I admit that like it's a little bit like cliche storytelling, like a little bit, but like I thought that it was still executed like pleasantly enough to the point where, like, once again, Gugu, I think the focus on really just Gugu's like place in the world, having hit the sequence of his brother show up, finally him kind of like leaning into a little bit more of the romance. Was it a little bit cheesy how, like, you're telling me that these kids have been sitting there for what, like 11 years? I don't know. Okay, actually, I don't know how many
No,
years.
it's 4 years. 4 years.
4 years? Okay, sorry. So
Yeah.
okay, so 4 years they've been sitting on this type of stuff, and like this moment like finally happens, or like they've just actually been like
That connects.
yeah, like the connection like happens like then, like, is it kind of like canned? Like, yeah, like it's kind of canned,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, it was okay. And I do think that, I mean, it may be slightly mean for me to say this, but like also seeing the what are they called, the knock or the knock,
The
what is it?
knockers.
Knockers, yeah, seeing the knockers show up is, I'm like, okay, let's go on with this like plot, like, because okay, like, not to say that like I don't think that Gugu's
Oh, you mean like the arc, that story arc?
yeah, like I like want to see that go forward. Like, not to say that like I didn't appreciate Gugu's character, but I do think that like it's kind of like they've already wrung like a decent amount of juice out of it, and like at this point, like I kind of want to see Fushi's journey a little bit more, and so it's like, okay, let's get to it.
It's interesting that you bring
Okay.
that up, because
Yeah.
one of the things that the Guardian, I don't know how to
Yeah,
what's
okay,
called
yeah,
them,
the guardian entity thingamajig.
the guy in
Whatever,
cape.
yeah,
One of the things that he said to Fushi was, "Oh, so you've decided to stay here. I think you need to go. I think it's
Yeah.
time to go. Why are you
Mhm.
staying here, right?" And so
Mhm.
you're saying too, like, why I am done with him staying here. There's nothing that's going on, which I think is a parallel, because I think
Yeah,
maybe we'll see during this fight
yeah.
that, oh, because you decide to stay, something happens.
Yeah. I will say that, like, okay, my opinion on that, and kind of wanting to see Fushi's story go forward, I will admit, it's also influenced by the fact that I know that like the show has what was the number? How many episodes does it have? Like 28
20
or something.
episodes.
20. Okay, 20 episodes. So I know that like it's going to be going for a while, and at least from what you've said on your knowledge, the 20 episodes will probably be at what, like the half point, or like at a nice breaking point, like in the manga progression. So it's like,
Yeah, from what I recall,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so like, so there's like, okay, and so maybe there is part of me that like knows that like, okay, there's like an entirely new character on the poster that we haven't even seen yet, and more importantly, you know, like this is kind of like the show's supposed unique edge is about, you know, this Fushi entity, right? And so like knowing
Yeah.
that there's still so much of it, like I kind of want to see that happen and go forward. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, seeing essentially, I'm going to assume, right, like just, you know, this is the end of essentially Gugu and Fushi's, like, you know, like, shall I say, a life happy coexistence human relationship, right? Like that's, it's going to be, this is kind of like going to be the beginning of the end of that, and we'll start to like kind of see like, you know, all that go forward. But it is yeah, I do think that, you know, to give it credit, I think that, you know, this deep dive into this Gugu character was pretty well done. I think that was pretty well done, and yeah, it was pretty enjoyable, and it got, you know, such high scores for like a good reason.
Yeah, I mean, I give it a good high score just because of the growth from character development of Gugu in general.
Yeah.
Was really well
Mm-hmm.
done. I think the romance between Gugu and Reen.
Yeah.
I think just this season in general, they didn't have many strong
Yes.
romantic
Mm-hmm.
relationships. I
Yeah.
think
And
the number one I think for me is in Koi Kimo, and I think
yeah.
that funny enough, the side characters here are number two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it was great
Yeah.
that they.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while for them to kind of figure it out, and yes, it's
Yeah.
cheesy and kind of like
Yeah. Yeah.
it took them this
Yeah.
long to figure out the
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm with you. The fact like, yeah, I think it's time to kind of move the story further.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This arc, and you said, you were mentioning how it's kind of like
Oh,
they've milked everything that they
yeah.
could,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe you're right because the
Yeah.
only thing that they could milk was the the mix of the ending of Reen and Gugu's relationship. Once
Yeah.
that happened, and which it did,
Yeah.
it's done. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Yeah. Alrighty. At number 7. Oh wow. Okay. Minatsu gave it a score of 5.5. Shadow's House, stayed at number 7. Minatsu gave it a score of 5.5. I gave it a score of 6, and the rolling average actually stayed exactly the same at 5.73. Thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, so give it a 5.5, which considering all the shows, it's one on the lower side.
Yeah.
I think because this show, I think, is moving towards the right direction. So I think
Yeah.
this whole idea that the kids are starting to run a revolution against the Lord Grandfather is great. I like seeing that. It reminds me a lot
Yeah.
of Promised Neverland, which
Yeah.
had also a great first
Yeah.
season. I like that. Now, for Kate, she wants Emilico to be,
Yeah.
independent. So was another person, but then
was
Luis
it
and her
John?
shadow.
Yeah, I think it was John, right? John wanted it?
John,
Was
yeah,
it John? Yeah, John.
yeah. One of them. It was good that they removed the suit.
Yeah.
Whereas with Luis and her shadow, she still has shadow inside, and the fact that they're okay with it and they're still proceeding to go against their grandfather, I think that's great.
Yeah.
But I think as the season goes over, I'm not exactly sure how much plot development is left.
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, right? Like, okay, so actually, first of all, how many episodes are left in this season for this show?
One more. Oh, actually, I think this one has 13. Let me double check.
Okay.
Yep, 13. So 2 more
Okay.
episodes.
Okay, so first of all, we have that going. And then secondly, is there going to be a second season for the show? I'm assuming the answer is yes.
I think the answer is yes, but have they announced it? I'm not sure.
Okay. That being said, I can kind of only see this go one way. I'll just be honest, right? It's like, if the kids don't succeed in the revolution, like what the shit is the show gonna be about, right? It's like, yeah, right. So it's like it like has to be, right? It has to be them succeeding. So like I guess there's kind of like that element of it. Like, shall we say, like a lot of the show is kind of like, oh, like there's a mystery of finding out like what's happening, and I feel like I don't sense that kind of like, ooh, I wonder what's gonna happen, like type of like anticipation anymore. That being said, though, I mean it is still like. It's still like decent storytelling, and yeah, it's pretty much all I can say about it. Alrighty, at number 8.
Yeah, so at number 8 we have Tokyo Revengers. I get a score of 6, still at number 8, so nothing has gone up or down. I get a score of 6.5. You get a score of 6 for rolling average of 5.65. So it went up by 0.06. Your thoughts on this week's episode?
I am so happy they finally have like now begun to explore the relationship of time traveler, right? Like that's kind of like, okay, I'll be honest,
Mm-hmm.
like I've watched the show for that purpose, right? Like I kind of like I in my opinion the action kind of like it's like okay. The interpersonal relationships also kind of like like okay, like it's passable. Like to me, like
Mm-hmm.
the by far the largest appeal of watching this shows, essentially it's like it's kind of this it's this exploration, right, into like what would you do as a person if you could go back in time with your knowledge? How would you change the way that you live, right? And like final fucking Lee, do they like go back to that stuff? And like I was like super excited about that. I will say that like despite that, it pretty much okay, at least the way they ended this episode, they want you to believe that like, oh, he's kind of succeeded, and then they just kind of dropped a little revenge line at the end, or like the narrator line of like, oh, like like carry out revenge or whatever, and like that's
Mm-hmm.
interesting, but like at least just the way this episode was cut, they want you to believe it's like, oh, like they've at least succeeded to a certain modicum, which would be in my opinion, actually isn't necessarily all a bad thing. I do think that like if you were to spend the entirety of the show literally being like, oh, let's just keep on tossing like crap at the wall and see what sticks to finally have, what's his girl or what was the girl that he loved, Nanao's older brother, older sister's
Hina.
name, Hina. Yeah, so like it's like, oh, Hina's alive, and then it's like and Fiend. Like I wouldn't have liked that as much. Like personally, like
Mm-hmm.
oh, it would almost be. I kind of want to see like you know how are he and Hida now, right? Like
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is like okay, like to I'll be honest and say that I don't expect the show to end up like I guess taking that daring of a step and just kind of like keep on like trotting forward with everything's good with just him and Hina. Like I would be very surprised if they kind of had the guts to continue just going down
Mm-hmm.
that. But if they did, I actually would find that very cool. And if they focus instead on his relationship, with these people that he once upon a time existed with, for a gang and all that type of stuff, like it can't be easy to like adjust from being, shall we say, a delinquent, right, to like reintegrate in society, and like maybe exploring more of that, right? Like that would be pretty interesting. But well, we have yet to see, I guess. The way the episode is cut is, you know, it wants the viewer to think that like at least they've kind of succeeded, but there's still plenty of stuff. And mainly, like I said, like it's the expository narrators thing of like, oh, like we need to carry out revenge, and it's kind of like, oh, what's that gonna be? So yeah, anything extra to add on top of that?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of directions that this show could take,
Yeah,
considering too that this is going to be a 24 episode season.
yeah,
So we're only in the halfway point at this point.
mm-hmm.
It's funny because I actually did enjoy, the mini relationships in
Yeah,
this past.
mm-hmm.
I like that they're forgiving Peian for what he
Yeah,
did, even though,
mm-hmm.
and that's, what makes this gang supposed to be special.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
I think the moment that I liked the most was
Mm-hmm.
Mikey crying,
Okay. Yeah, mm-hmm.
because him breaking down and being relieved that Draken is alive
Mm-hmm.
shows how much. Well, it's the first time he was kind of
Yeah,
emotional,
mm-hmm.
but also shows that if Draken did die, it makes sense how Mikey became a changed person, right? Because they
Yeah,
were saying
mm-hmm.
how Mikey changed because Draken died, and so this was a
Yeah,
good insight to like, oh,
yeah, yeah,
this is the
mm-hmm.
feelings that he has for him. This is
Yeah,
why he would cry. So I was like,
mm-hmm.
you know what? That's cool. And I also like that Mikey, kind of has a little sneaking suspicion of Takemichi
Yeah.
because he kind of knows a little bit too much.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
So
kind
I
of
enjoyed
weird.
that. And I
Yeah.
think that might have effects
Yeah.
it
I,
for the future because I think
I'm
it
yeah.
has developer.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's a kind of Chekhov's gun principle, right? Where it's like, oh, like if you like put it there, like it's got to be addressed later, right? Like your
Mm-hmm.
type of
Yeah.
thing. Like and like yeah, like I personally I would really find it cool of like like Avengers, right? And exploring, like essentially in present day, right? Like how are the rest of them doing, right? And all that type of stuff. Like it would, I personally would enjoy that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But we have yet to see exactly where it's going. Overall,
Yeah.
do decent. Like I said, it's definitely a huge sigh of relief for me, where it's like, yes, let's get back to this dynamic, right? Because
Hmm.
that's the main draw of the show, and to be honest, that's why I watched the show, right? Or I watched the show with a decent amount of enjoyment, right? It's specifically for that, so I'm glad that they went back to that. So yeah, at number 9 is Mars Red. You gave it your lowest score of the week at 5.3. I gave it a score of 6, and the rolling average was 5.52. I have a suspicion as to why your score was that, but go ahead. Tell me what you thought about this episode.
Yeah. So this one's interesting because I realized the show is not about Maeda-san at all.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
realized that the main character really is what's his name, Shutaro. He seems to be like the main
Yeah.
character because I think I had this idea that Maeda-san was the main character, and I was like, I'm kind of disappointed they're not revolving
Yeah.
around him. But it seems like he is not the main character. Could be the antagonist. Who knows, right? I thought her dying was very predictable, or like, maybe she's not dead, but her like
Being
blocking
stabbed. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Maeda-san killing, like
Mm-hmm.
stabbing him to stop the
Yeah.
conflict. I thought that was really predictable.
Yeah.
I think the story of Shin and his rescuer
Yeah.
was okay. It was kind of
Yeah.
jam packed,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that the biggest difference in this show, what separates
Mm-hmm.
vampires from humans, is really just the immortality aspect.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's so much feelings because I've lived forever. You just don't understand me because I've lived forever. And I was like, I guess that is a topic to explore.
Yeah.
But
I
all the
mean,
things
it's.
that I wanted
Uh-huh.
weren't delivered this episode, and it's not the
I see.
direction that
Yeah.
the show is going towards. And so I was like, also
Okay.
when they were like drowning in the water, like there was a door open on the wall. I was like, wait, couldn't how they have just
I
escaped?
mean,
He's noticed it too, right?
okay. Like, let me put it like this: all it takes is 5 seconds of you having somebody go over, try the door, and then not opening. Right? That's like all you need to do as a viewer to kind of like get that out
Yeah.
of my mind. Right? Like, it takes like almost no screen time. Just go over, be like, oh, it doesn't open. Okay, there you go. Like, I'm done. Like, that's all I would have taken. So like, you like, but it's like, just kind of this little thing in the back of your mind where you're like,
It was an open door too, by the way.
oh. So I don't know, right? Like I said, like like I said, it would have taken like 5 seconds for you to address like, oh, like why they aren't running through that or whatever. There is, I will agree. Okay, I will say that like first of all, I guess if we were to look at the poster, those two guys are technically the two center ones, right? In the poster.
Mm-hmm.
I really okay. Let me put it like this. I think it would be a really huge pity if Maida-san ended up being just a side character. I think that his character was the most developed out of all of them, has the most dramatic story to be told. And I really hope that this episode is kind of just setting up, shall I say, a little bit more dramatic feelings for eventually Maida-san trying to finish his mission off. I'm hoping, right, that like giving what is it, his name, Shintaro, is that his name?
Shutaro.
Shutaro, yeah, giving Shutaro a little bit more context, and like him having the whole like by the way, I commented on this early on, how I was like, oh, the reporter girl and Shutaro's younger sister, and
So it's not actually her younger
wait,
sister.
is it not his
They're
younger
just
sister?
childhood friends.
Childhood friends. Okay, childhood friends. And
The love, Mada's
love.
lover.
Yeah, Midas love like look way too alike, and I was like, it's kind of fucking
Mm-hmm.
weird. And then it actually shows up, and I was like, okay, all right, fine, I'll give you that one. Like, okay, but yeah, I will say that like, I'm really hoping that like they end up like this is just set up, and the final episodes are focusing on essentially, shall I say, Midas like, how does he actually resolve all this stuff? I would be very, very, very disappointed if that did not end up being the focus on the remainder of the show. But I have a sneaking suspicion that they will be spending a decent amount of screen time, shall we say, resolving the conflict between, shall we say, the dashing Englishman, right? Is that what he calls himself or whatever? Like the dashing Englishman, or like the
I don't have the name here, but yes.
yeah, like his like self-given title or some shit like that, where he's like, oh, like I have a suspicion they're gonna be spending a lot of time on essentially, oh, vampires versus that, which I'll just be honest, kind of don't really care that much about it. Would much rather just see Midas' story play out. I think that just within the genre, right? It's like if you're gonna watch like a historical drama piece, it's so drama-y. Like it's like that's what I'm here to watch. So yeah, like I said, I could anticipate pretty decently why you gave it a 5.3. Mida's screen time incredibly short, and it's just kind of like these other characters don't warrant as much screen time as Mida. Let's just give me you can't give me that solid of an episode where essentially this performer puts on all these layers onto essentially Mida-san, and then just not build up on that. It's just kind of dumb in my opinion. How many episodes does this show have?
13. So two more
13. Okay,
episodes.
so at least we have two more episodes. Yeah, I'm really hoping that essentially 1.5 episodes will be focused on Maida's kind of like decision, and the last half episode can just be them like clearing out the quote unquote the plot line of like
Mm-hmm.
artificial versus dumb type of crap. But
Yeah.
I would be happy if that happened. I'm not sure if that's actually gonna happen, but we'll see. If Maida ends up being literally okay, I will be so upset with the show if he ends up just being cast to the side and like basically no screen time left. It would be like the biggest blue ball. It's like just ridiculous. Like yeah, like ridiculous
Yeah.
like, misallocation of just like focus and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is I don't know if there's another season for this show because this show is based off a screenplay, like a music, not a musical, a play.
Oh,
And so yeah,
oh,
that's the original title. So there is a manga that is attached to it. The manga is
okay.
still ongoing because obviously it takes a while to do the manga.
Oh wait,
So
so they
I'm not
started the
sure.
manga at the same time as the anime, or
The manga started. Let me see. The manga started in January 4 of 2020 is when the manga started, and
so
they are still releasing. They have 14 chapters, which is like about 4 or 5 episodes of
okay.
manga of anime. So I'm assuming they're past the point of the manga and just adapting the screenplay.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
So not sure how much more there is.
Yeah.
It could be 2 episodes. It could be another season for all we know.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, if it ends up being like a one season, like, shall we say like a play in however many acts. I guess I have to kind of go back
Hmm.
and figure out how many acts I want to like assign to this show. But
Yeah.
like once again, like I said, like I really hope they have the wisdom to not just throw away. I think like the focus, like I said, like I would be very pleased if the last 1.5 out of the last two episodes, 1.5 of it focuses on essentially Mina's decision, because I think that he's like actually like symbolically the perfect encapsulation of kind of like this whole thing. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm cautious. I am cautiously watching towards the future if this show ends up surviving the gauntlet. So okay, yeah, and
And yep.
at
So at
the
the
yeah
last, we have no movement except for this show. Technically speaking, it is
yeah
Joran, the Princess of Blood Snow. Oh, I actually highlighted that. So I give it is at number
yeah
10, so it technically went up by 1 spot. I give a score of 5.3. You give a score of 5. Both are lowest scores this week.
yeah.
For rolling average of 5.21, so it went down just by 0.01. Why did you give it your lowest score this week?
Um, way to set up this entire thing between her and her master, and then just wing and just like like just not talk about it after the first 7 or so minutes. Not to say that like they can't talk about it more in the future. And I do think that to give the show credit, they kind of explored this a little bit better when what's the little girl's name? When the little
Asahi.
Asahi shows up. Okay, there was a part of me that's kind of like this show has like has an issue with permanence, where it's like it's getting to the point where kind of like does anything ever end up being like, it's like okay, like I want like things to have weight, right? To okay, let me put this as a foil to 86. I think that 86, what I gave it kind of like some kudos for was that it had the guts to kind of like follow through with, shall I say, some of the darker tone of the show, right? Undertaker freaking dies, and not only does he die, he gets sentenced to this like horrible fate of like this shitty afterlife, right? Like, and all
Mm-hmm.
this type of stuff, like, and it's like it's sad and it's crappy, right? And it's like the things that happen in this show like have a decent, at least some modicum of weight, right? This is the opposite of that, where like I feel like it's just like okay, this is like some like fucking telenovela where it's like oh like things will happen and then like guess what, ta-da, like we're back to square one type of thing. Like in like that is kind of like my feelings with like both the blonde haired woman and Asahi surviving kind of feels like a meh like type of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
to give the show a little bit of credit, at least like exploring her dynamic with her boss, right, through essentially her and her feelings with Asahi was like okay, like it was decent, but
Yeah.
I don't. How many episodes does the show have?
One left.
One left. Okay, so with one left, most likely it's just gonna be oh she's gonna go on this eternal journey and just continue to go on like and it's like I don't know it just feels like this entire show like has looking back in retrospect we have one more episode to watch but I'm like pretty confident just kind of like in seeing like what happens and like there's only being one episode left where it's like essentially much ado about nothing and I don't mean that as a compliment as like a piece of literature I actually mean like quite literally much ado about nothing like it's kind of like the feeling that I have right like it feels like a interesting enough I guess premise that just pretty much for the most part under delivered and I feel like it's like seeing how they kind of like chose to go with the story of both her and her boss and her and the augmented assassin girl
Mm-hmm.
felt kind of disappointing because it's kind of like okay like it just feels like you know it's like there's a very dark theme there's a very dark like setup and all that and like it just feels like the things end up being very vanilla or shall I say like trivialized. What did you think?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think last week was like all-time highs for this
Yeah,
show for the both of us, and
yeah,
it's because it finally delivered content that was easy to digest and made sense.
yeah,
And it kind of sucks that all of that ramped up to them not fighting. I was like, oh
yeah,
wow, okay, so
yeah.
that happened.
Mm-hmm.
The fight with the blades, it wasn't as emotional because it was only the second episode with the blades girl, and
Yeah,
so I was like, I don't really feel for her at all. And
and
so
to
when
be
that
honest,
happened, I
like
was like, whatever.
it's also like a lot more one sided than I expected. Like let's be
That should
honest,
be,
like
yeah,
yeah,
because
like
she
I
didn't
was
even
like
use her
oh.
powers.
She like legit didn't even use her powers, threw her fucking blade away, and just like hones this bitch like down the ground. Like I was just like, okay, like it
Yeah,
feels kind of
like
like,
her hands was
yeah,
able to just slice
yeah,
it.
it's
And I was like,
just
ah.
so fucking, yeah, it
And
feels kind
I
of weird.
agree
Yeah,
that so I'm okay with the blonde chick
yeah,
surviving because it was already hidden. It was
yeah,
all
yeah,
set up so that
mm-hmm.
she could live.
Yeah.
Asahi coming back was a little
Yeah,
bit,
it feels just like it's like Asahi wasn't okay. The blonde chick's setup at least was all masterminded, right, by the master,
yeah,
technically, right. Asahi's was actually guess what? Haha! I showed up on time and like saved her ass, like, and then like the fact that they had the audacity to try to give it some like legitimacy, being like, "Ooh, he has this friend
yeah,
that is very good and he
yeah,
owes him a favor." It's like, dude, like if it's gonna be that flimsy, just don't talk about it. Like, holy crap! Like, it felt like,
yeah,
like a shit slap in the
yeah.
face.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, if that happened before, like, couldn't he saved Joran's family? Like, I don't.
Yeah.
It just seems like something that just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And so obviously, with wait, how many episodes? Is it? One episode left.
Yeah.
It seems like she is gonna go ahead and face the Shogun and
Yeah. Mm.
the guy as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, kind of disappointing.
Yeah. Pretty. Yeah. To be honest, it's very disappointing. I will say that this show, like it, I think I expressed the sentiment in one of the earlier episodes where I was like, this show has like the weird talent of like having a mostly shitty episode always being brought up by like one kind of cool thing and like it's always like essentially earned fives at least for me around like the five-ish range precisely
Hmm.
because of that but like now kind of like looking in retrospect like I am very surprised this show lasted that long. And I'll survive some
Hmm.
of these other
Yeah,
gauntlet
yeah,
things. Kind of looking back, it's just kind of like I said, like once again, not as a literary compliment, but a literal assignment of much ado about nothing. Like yeah, to feel like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, that was number 10. So
yeah.
yeah.
Show the drop list. The drop list is To Your Eternity, Shadow's House, Tokyo Revengers, Mars Red, and Joran. And since we are on a odd numbered week, John, you have the honor of the first drop.
Alrighty. I would go into a lot of detail about how I think each of these shows still have potential and the reasons why I want to potentially keep them on. But I think if you were listening, there's one that's very obvious, and it's going to be drawn. This one has probably been the easiest, surprisingly, probably one of the easiest things I think easiest drops for me, just because of the merit of like the other shows actually being like this good, right? Like we're this far late into the season, it's been pretty good, and yeah, Duran seems like by far the most easiest drop, and so Duran's gonna be my drop.
All right, I'm gonna give me a sec as I format this so that
Okay.
the other slide looks good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm glad that you decided to drop that because I also think it is the
Yeah.
worst. Um, all right, so now that is dropped out of the four shows, and the reason why I think you're gonna use your save this week, I will be dropping definitely not to your eternity because I
Mm-hmm.
think that
Yeah.
is on the uppity up,
Mm-hmm.
but it ultimately is gonna come down to Tokyo Revengers and Mars Red
Yeah.
because I think Shadow's House still has something in it. I honestly thought you were gonna drop Shadow's House to gamify it so that I would have to
Okay.
drop
Yeah.
Duran. So I'm glad that you dropped Duran, and
Yeah.
I will be dropping Mars Red from the lineup.
Hmm. Trying to think.
Ultimately, because
Yeah.
I don't think Maeda-san will be the main character. I think it is Shutaro, and I don't know. I've been waiting for Maeda-san now for 3 episodes,
Yeah.
and I think I'm done waiting.
Okay.
And so the question is, are you gonna use your save? Because I do not have a save anymore.
There is. I do think that just by the nature of this show, my super honest opinion is I don't think most of
So
these.
this is a
Okay.
good time to segue
Yes.
to
Yeah.
talk to the viewers how we're doing next week.
Yeah.
So next week, we'll be watching for the most part the completion of all the shows,
Yeah.
but uh, as we've done in the past with completed shows, so Way of the House Husband and 86,
Mm-hmm.
we are still doing one more round of gauntlets next week. So we will
Yeah.
be dropping 2 shows next week, even
Yeah.
though we finished watching them, and
Yeah.
then from the survivors, we choose the best of the best. So it does make an impact if John decides not to save this week because he can
Yeah.
still save the show next week.
Yeah. Um, with that being said, I do think that as of right now, my snapshot is that like none of these are quite, shall I say, able to box with the top besides To Your Eternity. So I don't think I will have too much of a trouble dropping either of the shows. I think that you're correct in saying that if I had chosen to gamify it, I would have very easily been able to choose Shadows or actually, to be honest, it probably would have been Shadows. It would have been Shadows House. That being said, I think I chose Duran just because I wanted to drive home the, shall I say, the rating integrity of, this show was truly not
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah, yeah.
And I will be using the save, I think, on
All right.
Mars Red, only because I think that next episode when we finally choose the winners, I do think that at least based on the trajectory of all these shows, To Eternity seems to be the only one I think will really be able to compare to the top five, the contenders, anyways. And so I don't think Shadow's House and Tokyo Revengers will be able to really hold up anyway. So I don't see a use for the save. I will say to, I guess, as a disclaimer to the viewers and the listeners, that I also am not optimistic about Maida actually end up being the focus of the show. My honest prediction is that these guys don't know what the hell they're doing. They kind of like they lucked into some decent moments, right? Like I think
Mm-hmm.
the first big moment, right, that gave me such a good like holy crap, like this show's amazing rating, right? Was Maida-san handling of the soldier, okay? Now in
Yeah,
hindsight,
second episode.
the second episode. Now I'm wondering if they just legitimately kind of lucked into that moment without like some masterful like crafting, and then the
Yeah.
second super wow moment being the performer, right? The performer's choice, right? Of saying that like, oh, the story cannot end this way and all that is just so epic. And now I'm
Yeah.
beginning to wonder that maybe they just legitimately lucked into this. Like, legitimately, both those moments only happen because they're trying to need this thematic like thing, and like maybe like this screenplay, which is I won't, like this won't be like we won't focus that much on, shall I say, the creation of these shows on this podcast, but I am kind of curious to see like why this screenplay even got adapted if it ends up being, shall I say, in my opinion, of this low caliber. But yeah,
Yeah.
I am not optimistic about Mars Red actually displaying to us that they know what they're doing. I will be using it just because there is about like a 10% chance of hope in my mind that like this show will still end
Yeah.
up like going
I
somewhere.
think
Yeah.
in terms of strategy, you
Yeah.
should save
Yeah.
because if the last two episodes are amazing,
Yeah.
then it's good reason to use your save.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I will be using my save on Mars Red. Kind of like, as I just to put it on the record, I am also very unoptimistic, and I have this stinking suspicion that these guys actually just never knew what they were doing and just happened to hit some wow moments. And like both of our, shall I say, uh, literary minds, right, or literary like like brains saw this thing and went, oh, this is amazing, but maybe it was legitimately just like coincidence and it just happened to be
Yeah, yeah.
because but yeah, so with Mars Red being saved, let's see, I'm going to pull out
Yeah, go ahead and
quick.
refresh it.
Whoops, one sec. Why doesn't, okay, there you go. So I think, did this work? Yep, it did. Yes. Okay, so this is what the remainder of the Spring Gauntlet looks like. And in this case, we have um, 8. Wait. 8 shows
9
left.
shows.
9 shows? 9 shows? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so if you go ahead and move to the next
Okay.
slide, we'll show the
Yeah.
remaining schedule.
Yeah.
Tonight we had 10 shows, dropped 1. And so next week, week 12, July 7th, we will have 9 shows, dropping
Yeah.
2, and then
Yeah.
selecting Gauntlet champions. Reminder, no more perks. So the decisions made next week will be permanent. And there's no take backs at that point. But yeah. Again, if you want to support us through Discord, joining our Discord community, or through Patreon, the links are down below.
Alrighty, yeah. Super excited for the next episode of the Gauntlet, and of the anime podcast. Whether it's one show or one episode or 2 episodes left, we will be all watching them next week, and next week will essentially be a wrap up of the Spring Gauntlet. I definitely thought this was a pretty fun format. There's the shows. I'll just say this up front. We'll definitely be evolving, but I do think that like I said, like I'm very glad that kind of went on this endeavor. I do think that there were definitely a pretty decent amount of shows that ended up well worth my time to watch. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of wrap things up and see where these shows end. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Alrighty.
And so yeah, we'll catch you next week.
Alrighty. Yeah. Peace.